Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, let us continue on with our discussions of this wonderful series from 2020 from Steve McQueen, and it is called Small Acts. And we have begun our conversation about this in the context of the recent release made by the Criterion Collection for this year, 2023, which is right here on the table. Small Acts, 5 films by Steve McQueen. This is the 5-disc, or I'm sorry, not 5-disc, excuse me, it's the multi-disc Blu-ray set from Criterion, which encompasses the 5 films, or the 5 works that are included in the series Small Acts, as well as an additional, say, section or part of this release, which is focusing in on a separate but relevant documentary, which is called Uprising. So it's a multi-disc Blu-ray set, and it is stunning. And as I mentioned earlier, this was my first time to be able to watch this incredibly powerful and quite emotional series of works. And so what I propose to do, my dear friends, is going forward, if it's okay with you, let us focus some attention in separate video forms on each of the works that are included in this great series, Small Acts, plus the documentary Uprising, and then we can go from there. So in that spirit, my dear friends, let us begin with a discussion of the first film, again from 2020. Now, this is a digipack set, and so now we can see that it has 2 separate compartment sleeves, and so one of such compartment sleeves is right here, and this compartment sleeve it says Small Acts on the spine, and we see Small Acts plus a number of titles that are under the front cover of this compartment sleeve. I'm going to look here, which is the first one here, which is called Mangrove. And just to give you more context, inside we have the 2 discs of Small Acts. On disc 1, we shall find the work which is called Mangrove. And again, Mangrove is from the year 2020, and this is directed by Steve McQueen, screenplay Alistair Siddons and Steve McQueen. And among its really great cast, we have people like Sean Parks and Malachi Kirby and Letitia Wright and others. This is a work which is focusing in on the particular story, real-life events, and the particular story of Frank Critchlow and others. And I mention Frank Critchlow because we are reminded, or we are given the opportunity to learn about Frank Critchlow's story in the context of his endeavors to establish and own a restaurant, an establishment in this particular part of London in the late 1960s, entering into 1970. And this area, the Notting Hill area, as I recall. And this is establishment which is called Mangrove, and where the title of the work comes from. And also, this is a very key area, or this is a very key component of the socio-political history of this part of London, or in England, in late 1960s, early 70s, because this restaurant serves various, say, points of contextual reference. So first of all, as part of the personal and individual story of Frank Critchlow and Company, this is the place where it's sort of the center of his endeavors to essentially make a living and to make a living as a type of career. So that's one thing. And so this forms part of the emotional arc or the character arc of Frank Critchlow, and also the people that are closely associated with this restaurant that we come to meet as we watch the film. But that's not all, because we understand that really this Frank Critchlow and this restaurant, this eatery, and indeed the community writ large, we understand, is being subjected to some racist attitudes and racist attention in the context of the story, coming from certain members of the police force And we see specific instances, or incidents where there seems to be a sort of a great deal of sort of enforcement overreach, and which seems to be stemming from racist attitudes of certain members of the police force. Now, these incidents or these situations really accumulate and accumulate, and also we see the psychological and emotional effects on Frank Critchlow. We also see the psychological and emotional effects on other people that are associated with this restaurant, because we come to realize and know as we watch this work that the restaurant also serves a very important function and symbol and place as a community place in this community that is focusing in on the West Indian immigrant living experience of London in the late 1960s into 1970s. And that touches upon directly and quite starkly, that touches also upon certain racist attitudes that seem to be prevalent at the time that the members of this community were unfortunately subjected to. So we see, therefore, the effects, the psychological and emotional effects on other people that are, say, frequent, say, customers of the restaurant, maybe friends or associates of Frank Critchlow, and other people that come to realize that this place is a very important place, both in terms of community and also symbolically, and also as a sense of a type of the existence itself becomes in its own way a type of act of resistance or defiance. And so things reach a fever pitch such that the community seeks to stage a type of protest or stage a type of public act of protest resistance, which causes a very severe clash between protesting side or the protester side and the police enforcement side, thus leading to a certain number of events such that some members, specific members of the protester side, are charged with certain crimes that are associated with certain acts of aggression that are alleged to have occurred vis-a-vis this protester, this act, leading to the trial of the so-called Mangrove Nine, and the events of the trial and the efforts made by the people put on trial to try to essentially defend themselves, and not just defend themselves, but also make the case for this idea of the existence of what is claimed to be not just racist attitudes, but almost indeed, or not almost, but indeed a systemic racism that reaches into the very, say, roots of certain, say, establishments or certain systems or organizations. So this becomes a very key set of events, and these key set of events are based on real-life events, and Steve McQueen and company have taken these real-life events and put them in this dramatized form, Mangrove, as part of the series Small Axe. So it is a very stirring work, an incredibly powerful work, and what I think is there's so many things that are great about this, but one of the things I think is, of course, we are reminded that these are real life events, and so therefore the camera or the cinematic technique is never overly stylized. Let me put it that way. There is never a sense of technique or style overpowering the subject matter or the story. So therefore there seems to be this idea of trying to, in a sense, preserve a sense of quote-unquote the fidelity to real-life events, which I really admire very much. At the same time, there is a very interesting way in which this film, in terms of the style, does seem to present a dramatized form or view of a lot of the scenes that play out. So it's not shot in a way that is quote unquote cinema verite, or it's not meant to give a sense of a quasi documentary feel. So it's not pretending to be quote unquote reality, or it's not pretending to be a documentary. It is acknowledging itself to be a dramatized work that is based upon real life events. And so that's why we understand actors are playing real life characters, but they are actors in the roles, but they are also trying to, through their performances, present a sense of fidelity to the story arcs of these people who are, again, based upon real life persons. So I really admire that balance between the dramatized form and also the fidelity to real life events. And there is a sense, therefore, of a type of heightened drama. There's also a sense of suspense that I think is really well applied. The trial scenes, I think, have a great deal of procedural aspects that are key to the plot. And so oftentimes, or sometimes, procedure, court procedure, actual discussion of court procedure rules can be quite a difficult thing to pull off, I think, sometimes in a cinematic film. But I think this work really pulls it off very well. It presents information in a way that's easy to understand, and after it presents it, it then lays out the conditions of the issue, and then also it shows us the actuality of how things played out in the court and the effects of what happened. So there's a lot of procedure, but I think it's done in a way that's very easy to understand, or easily accessible, or potentially easily accessible. And those points are very important, because we come to realize too that one of the key components of the many key components of Mangrove, the story, and indeed the context of the real life chain of events, one of the key components is how the court procedure, or how the court system, or how the justice system responds to this situation of the Mangrove Nine and the incidents that sparked the protests to begin with, as well as the incidents for which the charges are based, as well as whether or not the government and the justice system in particular will take these points into consideration as to whether to acknowledge the existence or non-existence, as the case may be, whether to acknowledge the existence of a type of systemic racism writ large. And so that becomes one of the key focal points, the key crux of the matter, or the key issues of the matter, or one of the key issues of the matter. And so it's given a sense of historical sweep. It's also given a sense of a type of real pointed dramatic form that I think is overall very, very effective indeed. So this is the work which is Mangrove, and I must point out too the great performances, the performances here, Malachi Kirby, Darcus Howe, or Letitia Wright's Althea Jones, or Frank Critchlow as portrayed by Sean Parks, etc. I think these great performances, among the other great performances, really lend a sense, as I say, of accessibility into the world, as well as a reminder of the fidelity to real life events, as well as giving us a sense of the drama and power where indeed those stories bring to light the drama and tension and real struggles and triumphs and tragedies of these people, these characters that are, again, creating a sense of fidelity to the real life persons that were a part of or associated with or otherwise in the context of the Mangrove Nine. So these performances are really fantastic, and I mentioned too the great sense of style from Steve McQueen and others in terms of the balance between style and then also between that and telling the story in a type of cinematic form while also trying to maintain a sense of fidelity to real life events. So for these and other reasons, this work, Mangrove, I think is a very powerful and a very emotional work that has a lot of implications and a lot of questions and a lot of parallels, I think, that one can make in terms of what we see in the context of this story, again, London, a certain area of London, late 60s into 1970, but also how we may, as viewers in 2023 and beyond, look at this and regard various aspects of what we see in this work, Mangrove. What we see here in this work might find a certain sense of relevance, for better or for worse. It might find a certain sense of relevance in the times that we are watching right now, 2023 and beyond. So, in that way, a view of this work, or many views of this work, Mangrove, as well as other aspects of small acts, I think, are very overwhelming and very powerful ones indeed. And also, I should say, too, finally, that the stories of these people, these individuals, it's, how should I put it? It's, the stories are not just, quote unquote, the socio-political aspects of their stories, which are acknowledged, very, very important parts of the context of the Mangrove Nine. But also, what's so great about this work is that we see the human moments, the human beats, those quote unquote quiet moments, end quote, equally powerful, equally as important. The subtle moments between characters, the emotional beats, a scene maybe involving a seemingly minor character in say the restaurant, but having huge ramifications. Simple dialogue here, speaking volumes about a character and who this character is and where this character is coming from, and the deep history, and therefore the great effect and great impact that the establishment of the Mangrove has, as well as the deep lasting impact that the trial of the Mangrove Nine might potentially have echoed. And so these character beats, these wonderful, beautiful moments, are also captured and rendered in great style and great format here in this work, Mangrove. So that's, I think, part of the discussion when I'm talking about in terms of fidelity to real-life events, a type of depiction of a socio-political history on the one hand, but also giving a sense of dramatic form. And that sense of dramatic form also allows us for these individual, human beats, these moments between characters and moments between people that are very human and very relatable, and thus giving rise to a great sense of augmentation or a support of the drama that is, again, part of the cinematic style and storytelling of Steve McQueen, but also an acknowledgement that that drama was always there, even in the context of the fidelity of real-life events. So I think it all comes together in a great synthesized fashion that is presented so effectively in this work, which is Mangrove. The Criterion Collection has released this work, Small Acts, 5 films by Steve McQueen, and included in which each of such 5 films plus the documentary are presented in the Blu-rays that are part of this overall package. And again, the films themselves are not given individual spine numbers, but the set overall is given spine number 1177. And Mangrove is found on disc 1 of the Small Acts discs. So when you press the selection of Mangrove and you go into the Mangrove film menu area, then you have the possibility or option of watching the work itself and then the supplements that are associated with Mangrove or otherwise linked to Mangrove. And I'll talk about those supplements in a little bit. But before we do, let me just read from the notes that are found in the booklet. And it says, about the masters, the 5 films of Small Acts are presented in their original aspect ratios. And with regard to Mangrove, it says, Mangrove in 2.39:1. And continuing on, it says also, approved by director Steve McQueen. These new digital masters were created in 2K resolution from the 35mm original camera negative with respect to Mangrove. The original 5.1 surround soundtracks were remastered from the digital audio master files, etc. So, therefore, I understand that Mangrove is one of the works that was shot on 35mm. So, this is, again, reflected in the notes that are included with regard to the masters again, for purposes of this Criterion release, the materials upon which this Criterion release was based. For me, having not seen the work prior to this Criterion release, unfortunately, I don't have any frame of reference. And what is more, I've never seen these works, say, projected on a theater screen. So I really have no frame of reference in terms of how the presentation is with regard to this Criterion release. However, I can say that I am quite impressed with this, and I found it to be, I think, very, very, very effective viewing. And I should point out too, well, maybe we'll talk a little bit about it in the context of some other works that we have in the Criterion, excuse me, in the context of small acts, in particular, say Lovers Rock. But I would say too that the soundtrack is also very, very key. And I mean this in terms of the soundscape. I also mean this in terms of the music and the musical choices. And this is not just preserved quite well in terms of the soundscape when watching this, say, Criterion presentation, but also the way in which it has a sense of detail and a feeling of authenticity, as well as a sense of the fidelity to the music. So very, very impressed with this. Again, I acknowledge my own limited experience and expertise with regard to this work and indeed the series Small Acts. But with that being said, I was very impressed with the way that this looks and sounds in the context of the Criterion Collection multi-disc Blu-ray release. And then continuing on, so let's talk about the supplements. As I alluded to earlier, when you put the disc into the player, you have a choice of which film to watch that is included on that disc. For disc 1 of the Small Acts discs, you have the choice of watching Mangrove or another of the Small Acts works. So when you select Mangrove, then that takes you to that film's menu. And then in that menu, you have the option, among other things, to choose the supplements. And so let us talk here about what those supplements are. There are a number of supplements. So first up is a kind of discussion. It is a discussion between University College professor of the humanities Paul Gilroy and filmmaker and writer Steve McQueen. And this is a sit-down discussion between these two people, and it's approximately 28 minutes. And it's described as being from 2023. And this is about small acts overall, and also it is about each of the works that are part of the Small Acts series, included in which, of course, is Mangrove. But that's not the only work that's being discussed here. So in that way, this is a great discussion. It's a really great discussion between these two. And we really get a sense of Steve McQueen's the concept and the inspiration and the genesis that ended up being Small Acts. The first concept being how to fashion the story. How to fashion the story in terms of the dramatic context, etc. And then while he was trying to figure out how to tell the story and fashion around certain characters, should it be one family charted through many generations that are affected by the various social political events of London life from the 1960s into the 70s and 80s. But ultimately, he hit upon the idea of telling each story, again, taking reference points from real life events or other aspects. And so that became a type of, for lack of a better phrase, anthology approach, which is the overall, I think, structure of Small Acts, beginning with, of course, the work that is Mangrove. And so and then talking about working with Alistair Simmons and et cetera. So we have and also the idea that comes into play here is how he puts it, the handling of truth and how to handle truth. And so I choose in my discussion to describe it as being an endeavor to create a sense of fidelity to real life events, and I use that on purpose. It's sort of taking my cues from how Steve McQueen handles it here, and really greatly in this conversation he has, because he, I think, in his comments, really acknowledges this idea of taking the dramatic form taking the dramatic form and really using it to tell these stories that are, again, based upon real life events, and trying to get at the heart of the stories that are at play, again, with things that actually happened in history. So, and for maybe certain audiences, maybe these are stories that, or aspects of history that were heretofore unknown. I can say from my personal experience, I'm not at all a historian. I'm not at all a historical expert, and that's also my way to say that this is a lot of this information and a lot of learning are the stories and the real life events upon which Mangrove and other stories here are based. A lot of this is information that I'm coming across for the first time, so these become a kind of jumping off point for further study and further exploration. So in that way, this approach from Steve McQueen, I think, is a very fascinating one indeed. So I should point out that also there's discussions about the music and musical choice, especially as it plays in the context of certain works. And we'll get a little bit into that when we get maybe into discussions of the other Small Axe films. So, and then a discussion too about how Small Axe played on the BBC and how it had a really large audience. And this large audience during this broadcast, 2020, really had, it was kind of a real remarkable, almost groundbreaking feat that's acknowledged by the two here when they're talking. So for these and other reasons, I mean, they mention the fact that because of the scheduling of Mangrove on the date that it was scheduled to broadcast, the BBC News broadcast, which was at the 10 o'clock hour, was moved to 10:30, according to them, which was not a common thing. That's my understanding. So that shows the kind of depth of the magnitude of the national event status that was the broadcasting of Small Axe. So on British TV. So I thought that was a really interesting anecdote. Again, I didn't know about that particular part, but again, I'm not living in the United Kingdom, or not living in England, or not living at the time of watching it on British broadcast TV. I didn't know the extent or impact in terms of the broadcast consequences, but there you go. So these and other details, I think, show, I think, the reach and impact and great effect that the series Small Axe, had overall. So this, I think, is one of the reasons why this discussion is really great. And then also the discussion then talks about specific aspects of each of the works proper. So it talks about Mangrove, and then also talks about the other works. So we're going to talk about those Lovers Rock and Red, White, and Blue, and Alex Wheatle, and Education, as well as some discussions about Uprising, the documentary. So it does talk about specific points about Mangrove, and if I were to share some discussion points about that, for example, about Mangrove, it does talk about the idea of the role of justice, and what's phrased here, the different role of justice, and how the aspiration for, with the phrase, a deeper kind of democracy, and how this part of the story is this idea of a type of resistance or type of acts of defiance that are indeed relying on the wheels of motion, wheels of justice turning in a certain way. So the idea of social change via establishment forms. Now, this is maybe on some levels itself seemingly inherently antithetical, but in fact it isn't. And I think that's the point that Steve McQueen makes in this discussion. And indeed, that's one of the points that is made very I think, potentially clear anyway when one watches Mangrove, or the context of Mangrove, or the subject matter of the Mangrove Nine. So, very fascinating thing here, as well as comments about how this type of story, the sweeping magnitude of the historical context of the story, was shown again on BBC, broadcast to a huge television audience, broadcast audience at the time. So well done. And then I should point out that there are other discussion points about other works besides Mangrove, but let me refrain from speaking about those here because this video is again speaking about Mangrove. This discussion is really wonderful between these two gentlemen. It's really great. So please check it out if you can. My strong suggestion, though, is this discussion is, it talks about Mangrove, but it also talks about other small axe works. And so therefore, I would strongly suggest watching all of the series of small acts and watching Uprising. Watch those first, and then after you've seen those, you can go to this discussion between the two here that's included, connected with Mangrove. So this discussion can be said to be talking about small acts writ large overall, as well as Uprising documentary overall. Included in which is Mangrove, but there are other aspects. So please keep that in mind. It is part of the Mangrove supplements, in terms of the fact that it's included with the Mangrove supplements on the submenu. But just keep that in mind. It's probably more befitting as an overarching supplement discussion. So in that spirit, my strong suggestion is watching all the series first. And then you can watch that great discussion between the two. It's really great, by the way. So this is the discussion between Steve McQueen and Paul Gilroy from 2023, approximately 28 minutes. And then the next supplement, Mangrove supplement, is Behind the Scenes. And this is approximately 3 minutes and 40 seconds. And so this behind the scenes part is specific to Mangrove. And so it's a kind of a sit down, almost maybe extended promotional behind the scenes look with some quick excerpted discussion interview points from Steve McQueen, Tracy Schofield, and others, including Malachi Kirby and Letitia Wright and Sean Parks, etc., speaking specifically about the context, the historical context and the cultural context, London, Notting Hill, 1970, the Mangrove Nine, etc., so, and the trial and the subsequent legacy of the trial of the Mangrove Nine, etc. So this is a very brief but also very Mangrove-specific supplement. So it's worth checking out if you can, behind the scenes. And then focusing in on the trailer here. And this is also Mangrove-specific, although, again, touching about small acts as well. So this is the extent of the supplements that are linked to the title Mangrove as it appears on disc 1 of the Small Axe Blu-ray discs from Criterion. So the probably the longest one, the discussion with Steve McQueen, this can be said to be small axe writ large, though it does have a Mangrove specific part. But again, as I said earlier, my strong suggestion is to watch that after you've seen the entirety of the series. So. But again, well worth it, worth checking out if you can. So that is the discussion of the supplements that are linked with Mangrove. I'll talk a little bit more about the packaging and the Digipack style and the cover art design when we get to the overall or the wrap-up discussion a few videos from now. But just for purposes of Mangrove and just to conclude our discussion with regard to Mangrove, let me point to the booklet. And this is a stapled booklet, robust booklet, which is really great. It does have an essay that is an over or all-encompassing essay touching upon small acts as a whole, plus each of the works as a whole. So that is a sort of comprehensive essay, which we'll talk a little bit about in a few videos from now. But let me point to, for example, some of the pages, some of the pages that are focused, that are Mangrove specific. So page 4 and 5, yes, focusing on Mangrove here. You can see a little write-up on Mangrove, plus a list of the cast and crew credited for this specific film. So there are certain film-specific points of the booklet, as well as some comprehensive points, and we'll talk more about the booklet again in a future video, but for now, please note that there is Mangrove-specific pages that are here as well. So, but a discussion of the booklet and the cover art and the box a little bit later. But with respect to Mangrove, let us conclude our discussion, and we'll pick up the discussion next time with a talk about the next work in the series, Small Axe. But my dear friends, that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great, great movies. So until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.